we're going to do the Articles of Confederation today, and really focus in on that a lot. And then, and if you have questions while I chat here or talk, you can post them in chat. And then we're going to go to the Constitutional Convention, and we're going to write a constitution. I mean, not literally, but somebody's going to write a constitution. Pretty awesome people. The demigods, Jefferson called them, tomorrow. Y'all ready? You feeling it? Let's write a constitution we want.
Constitution.
So, one of the great questions yesterday was, why make a weak government? And we will answer that today. But before we do, I want to talk a little bit about a part of the chapter that is really at the end, and I think it shouldn't be. If you go to the very end of your study guide, so I know it's out of order of the textbook, but that's me. Go to the very end to where it says, you guys need a study guide?
I'll take a hard.
No hard? Okay. Give me a second while I print these shirkers out of study guide. I came to class unprepared. You know what you get? You know what you get when you do that? F plus.
Yes, sir.
F plus, baby. All right. Let me print out. What'd you say? 2 of them? All right. I'll print a third if you want. Just to keep the hands busy. I get it. Keep those hands busy. All right, I'll let y'all look at that handsome dude instead. He does have a fascie. Very good. He does a good catch. Gabe said it looks like he has a fascie, right? Yeah, so those of you guys who know what fascism is, that is a bundle of sticks together with an axe head, which is exactly what a fascist is. But this guy is not a fascist, so I'll make that point. He's a Roman historically great figure. All right, so we're on the last page of chapter 9, okay? What? Staple? Yeah, I can staple. We're on the last page of the handout. I'm trying to limit contact. That's the key. That's unexpose you guys. See, that is a very good catch. Gabe picked up on that this guy with his bundle of sticks, and he has a plow. Do y'all see that? You see in his other hand the plow? So he has a weapon in one hand and a plow in the other, and that is a symbol. Now today we have a phrase from the Bible that says, "From swords to plowshares." Right? Everybody ever heard that? Hammering swords into plowshares. It means turning weapons into farming. And there was a famous figure of Roman history, the Republic, pre-imperial history, whose name was Cincinnatus. Cincinnatus, we have a city here in America named after him. And in America, he was seen as many ways the epitome of a role model. And so when we think about George Washington, he is sometimes referred to as the American Cincinnatus, because here was a man who was a farmer, right, by nature. And when his country needed him, he rose up and commanded troops, right? And then at the end, unlike Caesar, he put down his sword, or in this case, his axe, and he went back to his plow. So the ultimate figure of sort of like historic role model for our founding generation is Cincinnati or Cincinnatus. And so you had an actual group of veterans who created the Society of Cincinnati. See that on number 63 there. The Society of Cincinnati was a veterans group, okay, who intended to kind of create like a hereditary leadership class, kind of like the patricians, if you will, of ancient Rome. They were made fun of and mocked by the ordinary people because they said, well, this is too pretentious. But if you wanted to get Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr and George Washington in a room together, it would be at a meeting of this organization. So this was an early influential organization. And again, they're modeling themselves after the ancient Roman heroes. Everybody understand? Particularly this guy. So I would be familiar with this group, the Society of Cincinnati. I also understand why they were criticized because this last section in the textbook, which is really a useful section for me, is called The Pursuit of Equality. And it lists a series of things that states do, the new states do. And I think this should predate that other stuff because they do this almost right away. This should come at the beginning of the chapter, I think, not the end. But nonetheless, there it is. So so the word egalitarian means equal. So somebody reading on page 178, give me some egalitarian things. Nobody? Nobody got a book? Most states reduced property requirements, meaning the less amount of property. Do you see that to vote? So reduced property holding requirements. They took away any kind of title. They abolished indentured servitude, right? So in other words, were they moving towards a more egalitarian society? A society without lords and dukes and formal classes. That's important. That's why they made fun of this group, because they saw them as sort of like an attempt. I don't think they were an attempt to really make themselves like lords, but they were like, it did have a very aristocratic feel to it. But most of these guys were really rich, kind of like the Masons. George Washington was a Mason. Masons were not liked in America either. They were seen as secretive and kind of pretentious, snobby, and thus they were criticized here. Okay, but perhaps. It also mentions later, they get away with all those old inheritance laws. You remember primogeniture, that only the eldest son could inherit land? They did away with that. So anything that kind of reeked of class division was eliminated. Another major democratic thing they did, and this is a huge one, and you definitely need to know this here in this Commonwealth, is 64 and 65, they disestablished the Anglican Church in Virginia. Now, I do want to point this out. The established churches of the Anglican Church and the Congregational Church did still exist, for a while. Now, it was turned into something called the Episcopal Church. Once we got rid of the government-sponsored church. So think about the Anglican Church. Why would there be no more Anglican Church?
Because the Anglican Church was associated with England, and they had practically nothing to do with England anymore.
Right, and the Congregational and the Anglican Church were the only two churches that had been formally established. You guys understand what that means? The Puritans made you pay taxes for their church. Everywhere the Anglican Church was, you had to pay taxes for that church, right? Well, now in Virginia, the Anglican Church is disestablished. But let me show you something, and I need to make this a PowerPoint ad. This establishment came at a varied rate or varied time. Meaning, Virginia, one of the very first, right? And we're going to talk about, or here it is. Jefferson with Virginia Baptist writes this document, one of the three things he's most proud of. But when you go and look at established churches in America, they're going to continue after the Revolution. So if you go back and look, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. I want the year the disestablishment occurred last. It'll come to me in a second. I'll find it. Massachusetts. All right. So I'm going to just copy this since it's cited. So most churches by the revolution are going to stop making you pay taxes for the church, right? But check this out. What am I sharing currently? I always like to use this as an insight into the Constitution's Bill of Rights later. So look at this. Look at what I'm showing out here. What does anybody see what's odd about this? Come on, nobody sees what's odd about this year, particularly here? Am I not showing y'all the PowerPoint? That could be the problem. Oh, there it is.
No, you are.
What's wrong with that? Why this should jump out at you as weird? What is this? In 1833, Americans are paying taxes to a church in Massachusetts. All right. Guys dropping the ball here. Not giving me what I'd hope to hear. Maybe you don't know enough about it. Allow me to show you something else. Nope, not that. Take a read. Anybody know when the First Amendment was ratified to the Constitution of the United States? It was well before 1833, right? This was created in 1789. Read me the beginning.
Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof.
What does this say?
Establishment.
And
Establishment.
so some students are like, who are attentive, are like, how on earth could these states still make you have established religions 30 years after the Bill of Rights? All right, let's
I
learn
guess there's
some
a jet lag effect.
jet lag. Lag.
Like
Yeah,
it took them that long to figure it out. Oh no, we got to stop this Congress.
Good guess, though. I mean, I'll take that as a decent guess. At least you're playing. Now, read the first word in the First Amendment.
Congress.
Not Congress, man.
So, one of the things Americans don't seem to understand about the Bill of Rights is that the Bill of Rights applied to the federal government. That meant your state could do whatever the heck it wanted.
Right.
You understand?
Yeah.
That's what people get confused
States
by.
have the
Like,
power, not
this
the federal
means
government.
America cannot establish a church.
Right. That
Very
makes
good.
more sense.
So this is why you get confusing things like states as late as 2 years ago banning certain types of firearms. I thought there was a Second Amendment. Congress shall make no law, right? So until there's something called the 14th Amendment, you ever hear that? Until there's something called the 14th Amendment, the 10 First Amendments do not apply to the states.
When is that like?
That's during the Civil War.
Yeah,
It's 1865. And even that interpretation is not until the 1880s. We call it selective incorporation, which means the rights guaranteed in the Bill of Rights have to be adopted by the states. But that is not the case before the Civil War. So if you see events before the Civil War, like limitations on speech or limitations on press by the state, can they do that? Now, the reason most states don't is because of guys like this. Thomas Jefferson makes a law that says this: Virginia shall make no law establishing a religion. You understand? Virginia, a bill for the establishment of religious freedom. So he pushes for the disestablishment, and many, many other states follow suit. So understand that's democratic, right? Your tax-paying money does not have to go. But in New England, the Congregational Church, that's what church that is, congregational, is very, very strong 40 years, 50 years after the Revolution. So I want y'all to, and this is sort of like an intro into what is called federalism. Keep in mind, we're not there yet. We're not in a federal system yet. We're in a confederation. So can Connecticut do basically whatever it wants? Massachusetts. And so again, try to think of the 13 states as like 13 countries. Well, in a sense, because some of us people say we're still states first, country second. Exactly right. And we'll have that talk about it. Yes, good point. So make sure you understand that this is more democratic, and we want to give him a shout out. TJ. Now here's another thing about TJ I like. So if you were to be Thomas Jefferson, and he picked what was on his tombstone. This is at Monticello down the hill. Keep in mind, this guy was our first ambassador to France under our nation. He was our first Secretary of State. He was our second vice president. He was our third president. He was the governor of Virginia. Is any of that on there? Author of the Declaration of American Independence. Okay. Writer or author of the Statute of Virginia for Religious Freedom. And the father of the University of Virginia. So here's a guy that's done almost every political act possible in American history, right? And he doesn't want any of that on there. He wants his creations that he thinks are most reflective of his love for liberty. You can't have an educated society without schools. This guy as governor of Virginia is going to push for public education like New England, and he's going to get voted down 7 times because Virginians don't want to spend their money educating other Virginians' kids. We're still like that in some parts, like here. All right, so you get the idea that this was a momentous occasion to say that you can worship without having to pay taxes, or not worship at all if you don't want to. Jefferson, by the way, guys, remember, what's Jefferson's religious philosophy? He's a deist. Very good. He's a deist, which means he doesn't like church particularly. He doesn't like organized religion. He thinks they're the ones that screwed up the true faith, so to speak. Another thing that happens that's very, very noteworthy. So again, if you're looking here, let's talk about it. The very first, and man, I love these guys. If you want to talk about somebody I have great respect for throughout all American history, it's the Quakers. Because the Quakers created the world's first anti-slavery society. Now, obviously, slaves were anti-slavery, all right, but as far as an organized white group, they're the ones that long before any other groups majorly, they were opposed to slavery. And even though Benjamin Franklin wasn't a Quaker, the Quakers of Pennsylvania got Franklin to sign a document to the government urging to end slavery. And so when Franklin signed it, it's important. So the Quakers created an abolitionist group in Philadelphia, and Pennsylvania abolished slavery. So if you take a look up here, free states, right? I should make this larger. So, a lot of people think, well, there must have been somebody who made them in slavery. Well, in some ways it was kind of natural, a natural death. But in others, Pennsylvania particularly, and these states up in New England, they chose to do it. They voted. Keep in mind, had Britain made them keep slavery? Yes. Have I not shared with y'all the slave clause of the Declaration of Independence that got taken out? The anti-slavery clause. Okay. Let me dig up the anti-slavery clause real quick, because it's important that you guys recognize that there were Americans early on who wanted to end slavery, but who wouldn't let them? Britain. That's right. The British government. And let me ask you all this. Why do you think the British government would not let them in slavery? Too much money. Yeah, they were making too much money off of it, particularly investors in Parliament and things like that. But yeah, I'm going to show you this because I will say this. Jefferson, while not freeing his own slaves, keep in mind, Jefferson was almost a hostage to his debt. It's very unfortunate. He owed so much money. Here it is. So I'm going to present this maybe. When Jefferson had written the Declaration of Independence, if you read the Declaration of Independence, like the last 2/3 of it is the word he. He did this, he did that. So I'll show you that in a minute. But if you're following along with me, this is what Jefferson had in the Declaration of Independence that Franklin, who hated slavery, actually encouraged him to take it out. Let's ask why that would happen. Why did Franklin tell Jefferson to take this out of the Declaration of Independence?
Supporting the Southern.
Yes. The last thing the colonies need in the Revolution is to divide themselves over this issue. Franklin recognized immediately South Carolina is not going to go along with this if you say you can't have slaves, right? Because they're so invested in slaves and there's a large number of black folks there. But this is what Jefferson says. Now, what's ironic to me is that Jefferson is doing this. He's a slaveholder who is waging war in essence. But this is what he says. He puts the blame solely on George III, not Parliament either. He has waged cruel war against human nature, so there's an appeal to the rights of man, violating the sacred rights of life and liberty, Locke, in the person of a distant African people who never offended him, capturing them and bringing them into slavery. He uses the word slavery here. They don't use it in the Constitution, or it's not in the Constitution. But he uses it here directly. In another hemisphere, or to die on the way. He calls it piracy, the stealing of infidels, all right, meaning non-Christian people, is the warfare of the Christian king. Determined to keep a market where men should be bought and sold, he has prostituted his negative for suppressing every attempt by us to prohibit or restrain this. The word execrable is a synonym for poopy. So he's saying this is the S word commerce. All right, execrable, it's excrement. And that this assemblage of ours might want no fact of distinguished dye. He is now exciting those people to rise in arms. He's now saying, what happened in the Revolution? Who was Dunmore's regiment? Black soldiers fighting on behalf of the British. And to purchase that liberty, which he kept from them, and now he's giving it to them by murdering the people, all right, us, thus paying off former crimes committed against the liberties of one with crimes against the lives of others. So Jefferson is blaming King George III for slavery. Everybody hear that? So the interesting thing is, once King George III is no longer in charge, does Jefferson get rid of slavery? No. All right. So Jefferson the thinker is who I admire. Jefferson the writer, not necessarily Jefferson the doer or not doer. Okay. Because he's one of those guys who don't always put his money where his mouth is, so to speak. And that happens to a lot of politicians. He can't imagine life as Jefferson without life owning people. Okay. So anyway, let's get back to the articles here.
So when after King George was not the ruler, they were independent now. Do you think he wanted to and just didn't do it, or do you think he just didn't want to anymore?
All right, all I can tell you is what I read, and that is Jefferson throughout his post-independence career talks about slavery as being evil. The evils of slavery he talks about. He calls it poison fruit that will poison the vine of American liberty. I believe that Jefferson, like so many other people, the thing you need to know about Jefferson is he is enormously in debt. He can't get out of the economic cycle that he's stuck in. So in other words, to maintain Monticello, to maintain his standing as a Virginia gentleman, there's really only way to do it. And that's through this ownership of people. Keep in mind, by the early 19th century, like 1800s, trading slaves becomes more profitable even than just having agriculture based on slaves. So I think he believes what he said. It's kind of like me. I believe in the environmental movement and climate change, right? But I have not personally sacrificed to the point where my footprint is nothing. In other words, I want to solarize my house. Haven't done it yet. I want to buy an electric car. Haven't done it. You see, I mean, there's things that I want to do, but I can't afford. Well, in his mind, if he ended slavery as not only in Virginia, but as just personally, then he could no longer be Thomas Jefferson the way he was Thomas Jefferson. So that's not an excuse to do it, but it's a reason. And he frequently, Madison and Monroe sought ways to end slavery. But here's Jefferson's biggest hangup besides money. It goes all the way to Lincoln. Jefferson all the way to Lincoln felt like there was no way to live as a biracial society. Like they didn't believe that was possible, like to have a black and white society. So what particularly Madison and Monroe are going to do is to encourage something called the American Colonization Society. And that is to send freed African Americans to Africa. You understand? So it's a repatriation effort. And, it happens we create the colony of Liberia during the presidency of James Monroe. And so the capital of Liberia is called Monrovia. But African Americans who are ex-slaves don't want to leave America. It's their home. Even in spite of all of its awfulness, it's still where they are from. It's their country. And so colonization doesn't take off even Lincoln wrote about that had to be the solution for a while. So I think Jefferson hasn't figured out a way to end slavery because some states, even in the map I just showed you, do what is called gradual manumission, which means the state actually pays the owner to free their slaves. So manumission, have I taught you that word? I think I have, but I know I did online. Manumit means to free your slaves. So it's not as hard to end slavery in Connecticut, where you didn't have many slaves. But in some of the larger states, they had quite a few slaves. So the states would actually buy them out, like pay them for their property. I hate to use that word, but that's how they perceived it. And then there would be no more slavery. And so that's this gradual emancipation. And Jefferson envisioned that. In fact, they were really close to it here in Virginia in the 1840s, 1830s and 40s, but they had a terrible uprising called Nat Turner's Rebellion. And they were like, nah, we don't want free black people roaming around. So the Upper South particularly was on the verge of ending slavery when the Civil War started because it was no longer profitable. Keep in mind, if you own a slave, they may be profitable in their 20s. They're not profitable in their 60s. And you're still having to pay and feed them and house them and equip them. So a lot of Upper South slave owners are like, we're kind of tired of the whole process. So that's why I don't think Jefferson, he never could figure it out in a way that would work, he thought. Now, I believe you can have a biracial society, but obviously we're living in a multiracial society. But at the time of Jefferson's period, he wasn't ready to deal with that, or he didn't think we were politically ready to deal with that. Okay, but as you'll notice here, this gives you a pretty good indication that were there still slaves in the northern part of the country? Sure. Yeah. By the time of the Constitution, New York and New Jersey will start to consider getting rid of it. And by the 1800s, you will have a surveyor survey the southern border of Pennsylvania, a pair of them, Mason and Dixon. And that's the southern border of Pennsylvania, the Mason-Dixon line. And so below the Mason-Dixon line, southern Pennsylvania, will be the states that have slavery by the 1800s. It's where we get the phrase we think, or the term Dixie, or Dixieland, Dixon, Mason-Dixon. So, make sense? All right. Now, a huge component of this period is one that we've not talked about much. And that is that women did not change dramatically as a result of the revolution, particularly in areas of property. Once you got married, what happened to you if you're a lady? Well, let's say you were, first of all, a lot of women who were marriageable were widows. You know what that means? Yeah. Husband had died. So when their husband died, what did they have? What did they inherit in essence? The property, hundreds of acres, for example. All right. So when you got married as a woman who owned property, what happened to that property? It became the
property goes straight to the man.
All right, good. So that was a major concern for women. They also couldn't initiate divorce, and usually they lost custody arguments. But they did have some rights. They weren't without any rights. But one of the things that emerges is not only a right, but a sense of duty. And this duty that I'm talking about becomes known as Republican motherhood. So does that mean raise good Republicans? Yes. Not capital R Republican, meaning like the political party, but keep in mind, there are no public schools outside of Massachusetts, right? So who had the responsibility of raising and educating children? Mothers did. It is their responsibility to instill civic virtue. Remember that term? Love of country, patriotism, civic virtue. So for much of American history, this is how it worked for women. When you were young, you worked at either your father's place, like land or, fields, or you worked in an infant factory, like a young factory. But as soon as you were marriageable age, you found a marriage partner, a suitor. They mostly got rid of dowries. You may remember what dowries were. You know, because a lot of these are like working class women whose families couldn't get money away when they got married. But what happened is when you went into the home, that became your universe. So that was your sphere of influence, so to speak. And sometimes later called in history the cult of domesticity. So like a domestic goddess, right? Well, what does that mean? Feeding the children, clothing, managing the building itself, right? All of that would be whose domain? The mother. So if you think about traditional gender roles, you probably at your house may have quite a few still. Who's the primary food provider? Like shops for the food, prepares the food. Who takes care of clothing, particularly when you're young?
The women.
Right? Yeah, so has this changed that much? Not even with third wave feminism, we still see this predominantly. Okay? Who handles the finances of your house? Well, that's unusual historically, but not necessarily unusual today. But the point is that men had to go out in the public arena. So the world of jobs, you know, and the world of politics was a male domain. But women had a special duty, an elevated duty of preparing children for being American. Well, who now has that duty? I do, right? Like among the many responsibilities teachers have, one of the others is to instill civic duty and patriotism. And we're failing terribly, you know, as a society. You know, so nonetheless, if you notice the art of the period, you'll notice that who was central in virtually every image? The mother. The mother was the center of the home. Yeah, the lady was the center of life, basically. But you can see her raising young children and educating children, and that was her duty. You know, that was her. And if you think about Abigail Adams teaching her kids Latin and science, you know, math, that's kind of who the teachers were, so to speak. While men were off, you know, managing the fields or whatever. Okay, but I want to point this out. Women did not necessarily always like that. All right, so it's not like they were like, okay, we're resigned ourselves. And so in many cases, some historians point to Abigail Adams as our first feminist. By the way, if you're seeing this word ladies spelled with the I in the middle, that's a direct transcription. And if you ever see this SIC, that is an indicator telling you that we know the word that preceded it is misspelled, but this is how it was spelled in the original. Do you understand? So that it's like that's how she spelled what she wrote. But look what she says to John. Remember the ladies. Be more generous than your ancestors. Do not put unlimited power in the hands of the husband. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. If particular care is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to spread a rebellion and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws which we have no voice. Now, we know based on Abigail and John's relationship, that's a joke. Like, she's not really saying, I'm going to start a rebellion. But she is kind of teasing him, saying, hey, you better remember the ladies when you write the code of laws. Okay, so we have that. And then there are other early feminists, particularly this woman. I love reading what Murray says because take a look at what she says. It is so far progressive. She wrote a book entitled On the Equality of the Sexes. Now, it's about the same time as Mary Wollstonecraft doing her thing in England a little bit before. All right. But she was a firm advocate for women receiving equal education to men. Keep in mind, they used to think that if you were taught long division, ladies, it would cause you physical pain. Like they wouldn't do that in math for women. Math would learn the most basic arithmetic, women would, and that was it. Long division was beyond your ability. So the idea of women chemists, women engineers, women physicists, that would have been unheard of. You know, because that's their delicate brain and their delicate sensitivities can't handle all that rigorous education. Right. Well, Judith Murray said that's ridiculous. I expect to see our young women form a new era in female history. The revolution of events is advancing that half the human species, women, have been held in the night of darkness toward the sun of science. So there were feminists, women who wanted to have better treatment, better equal treatment. It didn't happen, though. In other words, her writings were interesting, but they didn't affect major change. Okay. So any questions about that down to Republican motherhood? I think that pretty much explains that. Okay. So yesterday we were talking about how democracy was appearing in the states. this takes us back to the beginning of this chapter. What does the word Republican mean? All right, in our case, if we use the word republic in America, it's representative democracy. But keep in mind, can you be a republic and not democratic? Yeah, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, right? Or the Republic of China today, not democratic. So the word republic literally means representative government. Okay? But in our case, democracy. What does bicameral mean?
Two house.
So in both Virginia today and now the U.S. Constitution, a House and a Senate, upper house and lower house, like the Parliament. Property was required, still the case. Okay, and the inclusion of bills of rights. All right, so here's the articles themselves. And if you look here, it talks about perpetual union. This is considered our first constitution. So I guess technically we've had two, right? But pay attention that the date when it was drafted, okay, is different from the date it was ratified. They started writing it the year after the Revolution's independence, right? It took them 4 years because they needed all 13 states to make it formal. And they just took their time. They got around to it. So they finally got around to it 2 years before the end of the war. So please know the articles. They're most famously known for their weaknesses. All right. Oh, by the way, why is the articles all good? You've read it. What's the big takeaway from the article? Anybody?
Stay right.
Okay. Yeah, good if you think that strong sovereign states, sovereign. What else? You don't get a U.S. Constitution without an Articles of Confederation. You had to have a weak government to pave the way for a what? A strong government. You don't go directly from no government to a strong government. You understand? This serves as a bridge between the Revolution and the Constitution. So these are its most notable weaknesses. It is a single house body, unicameral. Got it? To pass a law, you had to have a supermajority, 2/3, 9 out of 13. Each state got one vote, regardless of how many people live in the state. Was that going to be hard to pass laws? Yeah. You better believe it. If they wanted to amend the Constitution, the articles, they had to have all states agree. So you can imagine that wasn't going to happen. Biggest glaring weaknesses right here. It could not regulate commerce. That means if you were traveling from North Carolina through Virginia, Virginia could tax North Carolina products themselves. We can't do that. You can agree for you don't stop at the border here in Virginia and have your customs agent check what you bought, right? Well, that's how Europe was pre-EU. I mean, when I would travel on land across, well, heck, in plane too, but you would have to stop from country to country. It sucks. All right. Other major power that was totally lacking, no power to tax. Now, they asked for taxes. And I want you to imagine this. Imagine if the federal government every year in March said, hey, we would like you to give us some money if you don't mind. Is that how people would pay taxes? No coercion there, right? If you got the time, send us some taxes. And of course, they're like, nah. So without taxes, can't pay for what? Anything, particularly the military, right? No president, officially, no separate president, no executive branch, and no independent judicial branch. So this thing looks very, very different from what we now know. They did technically have a president, though. I tease the kids that George Washington is the 8th president of the United States. Why?
Because there were like unofficial presidents.
These guys presided over the Continental Congress, and they were called the President of the United States of America in Congress assembled. So they were kind of like Winston Churchill or Margaret Thatcher. They were like the prime minister. They were the president of the Congress. All they had as an authority, though, was to do what? Like preside over meetings. They weren't like an executive of the United States. So, of course, I don't want you to call him really the first president of America. But He was the president of Congress. That's all I'm going to tell you about. Okay, so these are, and by the way, whenever I show you primary dots, probably going to be on the test. Each state, and you were just saying, it's a good point. Each state retains what? It's rights, right? It's sovereignty, freedom, by anything not expressly delegated to the United States. Well, was there very much expressly delegated? You know what's expressly delegated? They could have a post office, so a postal service. They could make roads to connect postal services. Okay, they could appoint ambassadors for America, right? And that's about it. So we're like, okay, yeah, no loss there. But this is in Article 3, you'll see kind of what the key component is. A firm league of friendship for defense, right? So it's a defensive alliance, practically. Binding to assist each other against all force offered or attacks upon them. So if a war breaks out in America, the 13 states will send their private militaries, their state militaries, to some national effort. That's how it works. Fair enough? Okay. Now, one of the major issues that emerged out of the Treaty of 1783. Yeah, go ahead. Out of the Peace of Paris is we got all that land, all that orange land. You see it? So there's not much good under the Articles of Confederation, but there is going to be something good involving this. The Orange Territory. Now, first of all, who lives in the Orange Territory?
Indians?
Absolutely. Very good. Native Americans. So you got the Fox and the Sauk and the Cherokee and the Creek and the Chickasaw and the Choctaw. They're all in there. Right? But is that really our concern? I was talking to my boys the other day. I'm curious what y'all think. So we created a treaty with some of these folks, Treaty of Fort Stanwix. Remember that? So when we break those treaties, are they to our advantage? So why not break the treaties regularly?
Then they're not going to want to sign treaties with us.
So no one else would sign treaties with us, right? That's what you said? Like if it's becoming untrustworthy, then nobody trusts you? Is that?
Yes.
Aren't most of the treaties we secure, though, with the Native Americans through force?
Yes, and through surrender. So
here's my question for you guys to really ponder throughout this whole year. The taking of Native American lands is documented. We need to come to a mental idea about, is that valid? Can you take other people's territory, because you want it? Is that a bad thing? Because that's what we do. And the thing about it is like that creates what's called dissonance in our mind. You understand? You guys know what dissonance is? We're the good guys. So do good guys do this? I don't think we're good guys or bad guys. I think most of our history is we make decisions that are in our best interest at that time. You understand? And if it means compromising ethics or values, do we do it? I think it's very Machiavellian. I think it's very realpolitik. I think it's very traditional political views. The only difference is we have a guilty conscience about it. Does that make sense? When I say we, I didn't do it. I'm not the one who drove the Native Americans out of Georgia, right? But teaching this, people get all defensive and they're like, oh, how can you criticize America? Well, I love America. I love the people who fought for our freedom and fought to have a nation state. But did they do some stupid or not nice stuff? No, it wasn't stupid. It was smart. They got more land. So you're going to need to catch that. And do you know what dissonance means? Yeah, I get it. It's a thing that it's hard to explain to kids because you can't say anything critical without it being considered negative, right? But I criticize your work. That doesn't mean I'm criticizing you as a human being, all right? You heard of the phrase constructive criticism? Yeah, so when I criticize or comment on things in American history, That doesn't mean I hate America. So here's cognitive dissonance. The state of having inconsistent thoughts, beliefs, or attitudes relating to behavioral decisions and attitudes change. So if America is the good guy, how can we take land from people without fair or violate treaties? Well, stop trying to think of America as the good guy or not. Ask, is it, as a nation state, is it America's interest to move into those territories? Does it hurt the Native Americans? Are we willing to accept that? That's America. You know, we take half of the country of Mexico. We offer to buy it from them. When they don't sell it, we're like, okay, we're going to take it. So the question you have to ask is that valid? You know, because it's there, it's done, it's a fait accompli. Stop. I think we go through a really ridiculous effort to try to moralize it. Because if you make it into a thing that's good, you're basically justifying bad stuff, right? I've always been kind of the ends justify the means when it comes to politics. But you guys need it. I mean, do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah. I mean, Native Americans clearly lived here, right? And we clearly made agreements with them, and then we clearly didn't abide by them. So now Nicholas says that means other people won't make treaties with us, right? Or theoretically won't. I think the Native American treaties don't influence our relationship with other countries. I don't think it halts our treaty relationships with either England or France or whoever. Like they don't say, oh, look what y'all did to the Native Americans, we can't trust you. And the reason I don't is because of power. You understand? It's power. So keep that in mind. Power tends to be things that just, because I'm driving around Pennsylvania County and I see a sign the other day that says F, you know, Sedalia, CK, your emotions, vote Trump. All right. So, or no, F your feelings, vote Trump. So the question becomes, are we at a point now where we think talking bad about the taking of Indian lands, is that something you can criticize or is that politically correct? You understand? Because that's it. That's what we're having to deal with. Because we're now actually confronting the fact that before you can even really talk about you violated treaties and stuff. Now we are. We're there. So I'm not here to tell you that it's right or wrong. I have my own views on it. But my question is going forward, if we make a treaty with France or we make a treaty with China and then the next day we break it, is that okay? Keep in mind, I'm going to show you something in the Constitution when we draft it about treaties too, because it's kind of, I think it's kind of important to see what kind of behavior is acceptable. So yeah, of course, Indians live in that land, but we're not really counting on that as an issue, right? So what to do with these lands? What to do with all this territory? Well, had people already started migrating here? What had kept us from migrating across here before, theoretically? But what specifically? It's called the Proclamation of, and you need to memorize it, the Proclamation of 1763, right? Well, as you can see, were we west of the Appalachians after 1763? We, you know, Paxton boys in Pennsylvania, Presbyterian, Scots-Irish down here in Virginia, we're migrating into Kentucky. That's what prompted what conflict? Guys, y'all have to study. I'm not hearing anybody on there, and I'm not hearing anybody here say the French and Indian War. It needs to be like this. You understand? The Ohio River Valley. That's what that is. We're here. We're settled. People here don't like it, right? Natives. Too bad. But the question is what to do with all this stuff. Now, I've already told you what do we use this stuff for in the future. Yes, very good. The sale of public lands will help pay off our debt. But the question also emerges, who claims that land? Virginia, I've seen different maps. Virginia used to claim to the Lake of the Woods. A map of Virginia would be like this. Jefferson has a map of Virginia in Monticello that goes from Lake of the Woods all the way down to Atlanta, Chesapeake. All right, but multiple states claimed it. See, New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Virginia, Carolina, Georgia. Right. So all of it kind of westward. All of this territory was claimed. And when we were trying to create this Articles of Confederation, you'll notice it took until 1781, right? Well, one of the reasons why it took so long is several of these small states said we're not particularly interested in joining a country where that is one of our sister states, right? Or even more importantly, what? That. So in other words, these large landowning states are going to get all the wealth. And we don't want to join if they got all this. And so as a condition for becoming a unified nation, the big states had to do what word here? They had to cede. They had to give up claim to the territory that we got from here. These were Virginians. So could Virginia claim this? They had to give it up. So who got all of this? Continental Congress. So all this western land right here becomes Continental Congress land. Got it? The Congress, under the Articles of Confederation. So now the question becomes, what are we going to do with it?
Sell it.
That's right. But you can't just sell it. You got to divide it up first. So unlike Virginia's settlement practice, if you fly over these states in an airplane, you can actually see these laid out. These territories of these counties, like the lines. They literally took the map of Ohio, the map of Indiana, the map of Illinois, and they carved it up, like with a grid system. Very smart. Okay? And it would be a 36 square mile township. See it there? 36 square miles. Each broken into a separate square mile that would be sold. Okay? See how this is? This is how they work up each section. Half section would be 320 acres. Most people could afford 160 acres. So that was the standard farm size. Your yeoman farmer would have about 160 acres of farm. Smaller ones here, so this is the, if you look at the purple box here, that's what the 1 square mile was subdivided into, right? But the money sold from the 16th square mile would be used to finance schools. Is that smart?
Yeah.
So this is a very famous law, one of two. This is called the Land Act or Land Ordinance of 1785. When you answer this on quizzes and tests, the date is utterly relevant, utterly proper. All right, Land Act or Land Ordinance. An ordinance is just another word for act. What year? And it's the one that divided the territory into sections. Okay, so now you've got it divided so you can sell it, right? Then what's your other big issue? Now you're going to kill them. Push them out. I mean, they do have wars. Black Hawk War is going to be fought right down the road from them.
Other countries.
Huh?
Other countries. Like France.
Well, Canada's an issue up north, Britain, but not, no. I mean, what else with this? What are we missing? What's not happened yet?
Who are you going to sell it to?
Well, that's open to anybody who can afford it. The Indians should have just bought it. Right? They said, hey, give us money for our treaty and then we'll buy the land. You know, they could have pulled that. No, they wouldn't have let them do it. I mean, because some Indians did that in Georgia and they still ran them all. All right. What happens to this place? How does it become what does it become? In other words, nowhere else really in the history of, history had conquered lands been treated as the equal territory to the people that conquered it. So if you think of this was like not America, all right? We took it and then we made it equal to America, all right? And so that was kind of a radical step. We made Michigan as valuable as Virginia, right? Ohio had just as much as importance as Georgia. So this is really a bigger, more important law. And this territory that you're looking at is called the Old Northwest, the Old Northwest Territory. Today, we would call this the Rust Belt, all right, or the industrial heartland or the Midwest, maybe. So think Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Key voting district for this election. These 5 states will probably determine the outcome of the election in Pennsylvania. All right. So these 5 states, future 6 states, because Minnesota is going to be partially in there. All right. The question becomes, how are we going to govern them? Are they going to be like territories today, like Puerto Rico? Because think about, have we had Puerto Rico for the better part of a century? Oh yeah, 1898. Yeah, and is it still not an American state? No.
Didn't they become?
Go ahead.
Didn't they become certain territories after a certain population was reached?
Good. Yeah, people numbers. So there's a three-phase progress. Know the three-phase progress. Good. So one, you would have a territorial governor and a 3-circuit court judge, like 3 judges who would what's called ride circuit. So a circuit would mean they didn't have a permanent courthouse. They would just ride around. So they'd ride, and a governor. So for example, William Henry Harrison, future 9th President Harrison, was the governor of Indiana. Okay. Andrew Jackson, future 7th president, was the governor of Tennessee. But both of them have been circuit judges too. So that's an important gig. Got it? 2, when you had 5,000 adult men who own land, then you've got to create a territorial legislature, in essence, a Congress or a General Assembly. So once you've got 5,000 adult dudes, you know, you can create a Congress. And then, of course, what would they draft? What do you think they would draft? Say what?
A constitution.
A constitution, right. When they got 60,000 people, that's the statehood number, 60,000 people. Then you would have a constitutional convention. Now, technically, there's a 4th part. That constitution had to be submitted to Congress for their approval. Congress had to ratify it. But once that happened, that was good. And then what were you? A state. You were an equal state. Yeah, just like the other ones.
How do they determine like the borders of each state?
The original borders had to do with, they did surveyors of both geography, but also existing land claims. It's an enormous, there's a TV show, if you're ever interested, on how states got their shapes. Pretty cool. I think you can watch it on demand, but each state's border was determined by a variety of things. Sometimes it had to do with where rivers ran into. This is the Mississippi and Ohio River. So, and then there's another set of rivers right here. So a lot of times it was natural boundaries. It's kind of like here in Virginia, you know how the Dan River is the natural boundary between us and North Carolina? Pretty much. So, but they had surveyors who would come along and formalize the lines and make it precise. I don't know the details of that particular part of the country. Yeah. Now, there's something else the Northwest Ordinance does that's very big, and you should add it to the list. It abolished slavery in the territory. So there'll be no no slavery in the Old Northwest. Now, they will allow slavery in the Old Southwest. All right, which of course is Tennessee, and Alabama, and Mississippi. But in the Old Northwest, slavery will be abolished, or be banned. So definitely make note of that. And folks did settle the Northwest Territory before the Southwest Territory. Okay? It just kind of happened that way because they hadn't finished filling up Georgia yet. If you've seen the maps of Georgia, it was small up until that moment. You can see there by now, you see where the pink area is? As you can see, we're not where at all yet. My ancestor arrived in Spanish Florida in 1810 on my daddy's side and moved to Alabama, and then that's when it became a state. You know, so he actually came through when it wasn't America to here. But he settled in what's called Escambia County, Pensacola. It's the southern tip of far eastern tip of Florida. So all they had to do was like right here, move to Alabama. But yeah, this is the Northwest, and you can see here, look, like Fort Steuben, Fort Detroit, Fort Michilimackinac. So you didn't have many people out here. These were frontiersmen types. And of course, they're going to be directly in conflict with who do live here, the natives of these particular regions. Okay.
So why are there, wait, if you go back, why is there just like random settled areas in the, like on the border?
So are you talking about here?
Yeah, like where?
So it's not that random. This is, if you're close to a river, it's the best, like fertile soil.
Yeah.
Also, you can transport your goods down the Mississippi River. So this actually is the home of 2 rivers too. They don't show it here, but you've got the 2 other rivers that come down through here. This is where Nashville is.
And I assume there's also a river like in between the Illinois and Louisiana.
Here?
No, yeah, that one.
Yeah, that I don't know which. I don't remember which river borders, but that, remember I told you Indiana, Illinois had a natural boundary? Yeah, that's the boundary. You know, so yeah, and pretty much they would travel by river because there were no roads at all. No routes. They were like wagon paths, maybe, if you were lucky, but usually Native American trails and deer paths were the best you could do. But really hard to get out there. All right, and we talked about this. What did the British do to them, interestingly enough? Well, this is an American colonial trade deficit, so I mean, American states trade. We did trade with Britain after the war ended, but what were we trade? What was the problem? What was cheaper? What was easier to buy? What was readily available? British goods. You know, so we had a trade deficit because who's already had the Industrial Revolution? Who's already making stuff? The Brits. So let's talk about each. If you're looking at the world's ugly duckling, that's us. All right, the world's ugly duckling. There are 4 conditions of difficulty America was facing with foreign countries. The first, under Great Britain, I want you to write down a couple things. Regarding Britain, as you can see here, what were they doing with trade?
They were undercutting.
Obviously, they were trading like to undercut Americans. Britain flatly declined to make a commercial treaty or repeal the navigation laws. You hear that? They kept the navigation laws. That doesn't make sense. So the British were dumping goods, selling goods cheaply in America, undercutting American production. Got that? But here's another thing that you definitely want to make note of. The British did not evacuate their forts on the Canadian border, and they routinely armed the Native Americans. They would not evacuate their forts on the Canadian border in America. They were in our territory. So did you see that Fort Michilimackinac? That's a British fort in America. You know. And their reasoning was, well, America didn't honor its treaties with the Indians. It didn't honor its treaty at the end of the war, so we're not going to get out either. But what was particularly noteworthy was them arming the Indians, because who would those Indians fight? So it's this paragraph, put a star beside it if you want, that foreshadows what other event. Very good. Very good. That's it. The War of 18. Huh? Yeah. The War of 1812 is fought primarily because the British don't stop helping these Indians who are fighting against guys like William Henry Harrison. Okay. So yeah, that's a big issue. But what are you going to do, right? States are controlled of commerce. States had tariffs. Congress couldn't regulate anything with Britain. So that's what you're looking at. There really was no national economy to speak of. Another major problem. Spain. Spain did not give up claims to where? Florida. Well, certainly not Florida. That wasn't part of the deal to begin with. Florida wasn't in on the treaty of Paris. Spain owned, you know, they got there first, Ponce de Leon, remember? Yeah. But what else did they not give up claim to?
Mississippi.
Southwest, right.
Mississippi, Alabama, and parts of Tennessee and Kentucky.
That's right. Very good. The old Southwest, we call it. Plus, what did Spain control that was most noteworthy?
The Mississippi River.
The Mississippi River itself. Very good. Yeah. So if you are a farmer up in Illinois, you can't even ship your goods down the Mississippi because Spain says nope. Huh?
I remember just hates each other.
Well, I think the thing about it was this was an epic rivalry over land control. Yeah. If you think about the world of the 20th century, post World War II, a lot of our conflict for land has subsided. But if you watch what's going on in Armenia and Azerbaijan right now, they're fighting over who should be a breakaway state or not. You know, like right now, 300 people have been killed at least this week. So, you know, there's always going to be turf. It's just gang war on a large scale. You know, it's just another version of what you guys have to remember about history is it's human behavior on a grand scale. That's all it is. There's nothing different about the people who organize this than the people today. Human nature is human nature. That's why we roll the boulder up the hill and the boulder comes down the hill. So the more you study it, the more it makes sense. Or doesn't, but at least you can predict it. All right, so Spain, number 3. Who else is giving us trouble? France. Remember who loaned us all the money? France. Who ain't paying us back? America ain't paying France back, right? Yeah, sorry, I misworded that. And so the French were actually slapping tariffs on American goods and not allowing us to trade in the Caribbean until we paid off our debt. So here's where I want to ask you something. If the future of Virginia had been comparable to, let's say, Sweden, would that have been accepted? See, America, under 13 separate states, could have looked like Europe, right? Virginia might have been France, maybe, but I doubt it. Rhode Island, what is that going to be? Monaco, Liechtenstein? Yeah. So yeah, we were looking like Europe, a collection of states that was kind of a joke, because we didn't have a central authority worth of, we were so weak that even the Barbary Coast pirates were extorting bribes from us. They're like bullies taking our lunch money. Now, if you're not sure where the Barbary Coast is, I don't have it on here. All right, so the Barbary Coast is North Africa. So if you know where Algeria is, or Tunisia, or Libya, this is where these pirates were from. And so American vessels would sail into the Mediterranean, y'all, and these pirates would stop them and demand either money or take their products. So by the time of the Constitution, we're paying payoff money to North African pirates just to do commerce in that area. Like bullies, like, I want your lunch money. So America was not a strong country. Yeah, and I do want to point out the fact that it is extraordinary that we won the revolution. America defeated the world's greatest empire at that time. In fact, the British got even more powerful after the revolution. So it does say a lot about the patriots' resolve to keep fighting in spite of all of that, right? I don't want to in any way undersell, like, that was a huge deal to struggle through some of the worst fighting, a lot of people have ever seen. But now that we're a country, what kind of country are we? A weak country, right? Very weak. Not only weak in terms of domestic policy, like lawmaking, but weak in terms of foreign policy. Like, we're not respected. Just because we won the American Revolution, how do most people in Europe view that? Say it again? Well, they view it as the French won a war with Britain that helped the American colonies. A lot of people view it that way. Like in Europe, they see that as mostly a French victory with American assistance. Kind of the other way around than what we think about. All right. So if you see this, then that brings us to the conclusion of today, and that is domestic problem.
My curiosity, had Britain taken control of India at this point?
Not complete control. The East India Company was there. They gained quite a bit of it during the French and Indian War, but they're not complete control. Not like Northern India control. The East India Company is still doing its thing. India doesn't become a royal colony until after something called the Sepoy Rebellion. Sepoy meetings in like 1857, I think, somewhere in the middle of the 1800s, and that's when India, was straight up imperial colony, like under direct control. Before that, it's more like the Virginia Company of London, the British East India Company. So Daniel Shays. Now his name is confusing to some students because it ends in an S. Shays' Rebellion. All right, so you can put the apostrophe at the end of the S, and that's it. You don't have to put two S's. Shays' Rebellion. Now, Daniel Shays lives in that part of Massachusetts where the frontier is closest to, the settlement. This is not the best of land. It's Western Massachusetts. And the folks who had settled in Western Massachusetts are kind of similar to, like, the Paxton Boys, remember them? Regulator movement. They're rough country, Western frontier types, and they're having to borrow money to buy land. And the bankers are all where? In the East, Boston and places like that. So during the war, they're being forced to pay property taxes. And after the war, they have to pay property taxes right? And they are facing enormous debt. Keep in mind I've written up here small farmers, but a lot of these guys were veterans of the Revolution. I mean, a lot. Keep in mind, this is Massachusetts, where the war was basically fought a lot, right? And how had most of the veterans been paid? Well, they've been paid not in land necessarily, although that would have probably been a better deal. They were paid in what are called bonds. Bonds, which are like certificates of repayment from the government. Well, what's going to happen is a lot of speculator types are going to come buy their bonds at much less than face value. See, what are these farmers afraid is never going to happen? They're never going to get actual money, right? So if somebody comes to you and says, "I'll give you 10 cents on the dollar today, or you can wait another 10 years and get your money," what are some people going to do? They're going to take a lot of money. Okay, so that meant they didn't have any real money other than a little bit, and so a lot of them couldn't pay their monthly mortgage. Got it? And so, what do banks do when you can't pay your mortgage?
Foreclosed.
Yeah, that's right. Good. So this is what they did. Maybe you can see Shays' men march. Where are they headed to? Where do you guess? To Boston, right? They're headed to actually, they're not headed. They're headed to Springfield. Sorry, it's the new capital. They're headed to Springfield, the new capital. And here's where the site of the clash is, right? So they're spreading throughout, and then they're going to go up here, and they fight. But when they march on the courthouse, keep in mind who's ordering the foreclosures. Well, the bank asks who to do it. Who has to do it? The bank can't go do it itself. If you're ever evicted from your home, it ain't the bank that comes to visit too. It's the police. Yeah, the police kick you out of your house. So they're like, "You didn't pay that guy his money. I don't have a dog in his hunt, but you're out of here." All right. And so the government was going to evict these people, and so they marched on the courthouse, and they were getting ready to attack it. And Sam Adams, remember him? He comes out and he basically begs them, "Don't do that. Let us talk about it and reason with you." The neighboring state, it's not in this, but the neighboring state of Connecticut sends troops to help put it down, right? And finally, the rebellion kind of fizzles out. But they were very close to doing what to their government of Massachusetts?
Overthrowing it.
Just like the revolution, they're on the verge of it. I think Sam Adams' intervention really helped because they knew his credentials, but others too. Well, who watches this? Who sees this? He's like, there's no government to put down insurrection. Massachusetts wasn't capable of stopping this rebellion. And George Washington believes we need energy, is his language, in our government to stop these disorders. Energy. Meaning, what is not capable of stopping this uprising?
Just the government.
Just the government of Massachusetts. It says here, the book even uses a funny word. It says, the revolution had created a monster of mobocracy. Imagine if every time the public is unhappy that they take up arms and go after the government, then we'll have a nonstop chaos in this country, right? So when we talk about George Washington, he, like John Adams, Alexander Hamilton, and James Madison, are deeply concerned about property rights, because what do mobs usually do? Destroy property, right? They're also concerned about people not paying their debts. Like, I owe money and I'm not going to pay it. I'll just go, march on the whole government. So in other words, is this society disordered? And as a deeply conservative man, George Washington wants order and stability. And what government does not create order and stability? Right. Now, the irony is in your book, and I have no idea why they did this, in your book, they give credit to Jefferson of criticizing this as democratic despotism. Jefferson's in France during this and praises it. He's like, this is natural for people who are wronged. And keep in mind, they did believe these guys are wronged. The common man was wronged. It's natural for them to take up arms, right? And Madison writing back is like, well, that's a recipe for chaos. We can't do that. But Jefferson's coming from the French Revolution, right? This is 1787, the French Revolution. And they're going to be chopping off heads soon, right? So he understands that a little chaos is part of what other things. Liberty, not order. Here's the huge sort of scale of history. when it comes to government. It's Hobbes versus Locke. All right? It's Adams versus Jefferson, Hamilton versus Jefferson. The idea is that how much order and stability must we have versus how much liberty? And what we've arrived at is what's called ordered liberty. We have a lot of freedom in America, right? Some people want more freedom, all right? But we don't have tyranny in America, right? Some people want more government. So government creates what? Order and stability. The more powerful the government, the more order and stability. Saddam didn't have protesters in Saddam's Iraq because he did what? He'd have you shot. Didn't have major protests in Nazi Germany. What happened to you? So the order and stability swings more towards absolutism and towards totalitarianism, right? Dictatorship. But that's order, right? Freedom swings too far and it's chaos. So our society's history is sort of try to find the equilibrium, ordered liberty. And that's not an easy thing to do because what somebody's definition of freedom is different from someone else's definition, right? So regardless, what does Shays' Rebellion kind of do is the straw that breaks the camel's back here. What is Washington going to call for? And his friend Hamilton. They proposed a meeting to make changes to the Articles of Confederation. We need a more strong government, okay? And that's where we'll pick up tomorrow, guys, with what happens in these meetings, okay? I'll go to the Annapolis Convention tomorrow. Uh-huh. Okay.